Hello and welcome to the MOOCs course on International Economics. In this module, we will study about the European Economic Community. And as a part of covering this lecture on European Economic Community, we will ask three basic questions. One is about the Brexit. What is Brexit? And why is it relevant to the European Economic Community economic integration format? What is the relationship of India with European Economic Community, and what is the future of India and European Economic Community relations? Now, first let us begin by understanding what is the significance of studying European Economic Community in the context of international economics. Now, to be able to understand that, let us systematically go through some of the important points. One is, let us make a beginning to understand what are these economic integration models. Now, EEC, or the European Economic Community, is one of the most successful examples of economic integration, which basically demonstrates how countries can form trade agreements, remove barriers and create a single market. It serves as a model for other regional economic groups such as the North American Free Trade Agreement, or what we know as NAFTA, which is also now known as the United States Mexico-Canada Agreement, or the USMCA. Also the Association for Southeast Asian Nations, which is an economic agreement of countries in the Southeast Asia, and Mercosur, or which is also known as the Southern Common Market, which is also a trade and economic bloc in South America. The second point is, we need to understand about European Economic Community in the context of trade and globalization. Now, as students of international economics, you would have been introduced to the ideas of Adam Smith and the significance of trade, the significance of division of labor, expansion of markets, and so on. Now, in the context of trade and liberalization, the EEC, or the European Economic Community, basically is an idea to facilitate trade liberalization, which, as I said, is a key concept in international economics. Studying the impact of EEC will also help us in analyzing tariff reductions, trade creation, and trade diversion effects. Now, the third point is, while we are studying the European Economic Community, we also need to understand it in the context of the effects of regional agreements on global trade. The EEC's policies influence the World Trade Organization negotiations and set many precedents for regional trade blocs. So it also helps us to understand the dynamics between regionalism and multilateralism in international trade. There are a few lessons from Brexit, which is basically the UK's exit from the European Union, and a case study on Brexit will highlight the challenges of economic disintegration, making it a critical case study in economic policy and trade disruptions. It will also help students to analyze costs and benefits of trade agreements and economic unions. The next point is that with regard to significance of European Economic Community like economic integration models, it is important for us to study EEC and such economic integration models in the context of macroeconomic policies and monetary integration. Now, the EEC's evolution into the Eurozone particularly provides insight into monetary integration, currency unions and their challenges, particularly in the form of Eurozone crisis which occurred between the period 2009 and 12. It also highlights the role of fiscal and monetary policies in integrated economics. There is also a relevance of studying formations such as the European Economic Community and Brexit in the context of India. It has a lot of relevance to India and other emerging economies because India has significant economic ties with the European Union, including ongoing negotiations for an India-European Union Free Trade Agreement, or what are known as the FTAs. So understanding the European Economic Community helps analyze how India and other emerging economies are engaging in global trade. So with this introduction of what is the significance of studying formations such as the European Economic Council, let us now move on to the history of the European Economic Community. What is it? How has it evolved? And what were its functions? Let us focus on its formation in the early years, the 1950s and the 1960s. Now, all of you must be aware of the fact that the Second World War brought in many changes to the social and economic order of the then Europe. And with the Second World War, the depression periods of the US and its impact on Europe and so on, there were a lot of economic and social instability that was experienced in the whole of Europe. So it is in this context that we must understand this economic integration formation known as the European Economic Community. So this EEC was established by a Treaty of Rome on March 25th, 1957, and it was signed by 6 founding members, Belgium, France, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands, and the West Germany. What was the main objective of this formation? The main objective was to create a common market which would include free movement of goods, services, capital and labor among the member states so as to promote economic growth and integration. And as I just mentioned that this formation came up after the Second World War, where Europe had already experienced a lot of instability, both social, economic, also psychological and traumatic disruptions to the entire economy as a whole. So the formation of European Economic Community was actually part of a broader European integration movement after the Second World War, aiming at ensuring economic stability and preventing future conflicts. Now, if you look at the period between the 60s and the 1990s, which is a fairly long period of time, because this is the period during which many international developments took place in the global order. There were many economic and social changes that were taking place, and it is during this period that the EEC saw rapid expansion and development. For example, in 1967, the EEC merged with 2 other European organizations which were also formed as part of the Treaty of Rome, which is the European Coal and Steel Community and the European Atomic Energy Community, to form the European communities. And this was done basically to streamline governance. The European Economic Community expanded its membership in 1973. And in this expanded membership, it admitted a few other countries, Denmark, Ireland, and the United Kingdom. So the United Kingdom made an entry into this economic partnership only in the 1970s. Thereafter, many other enlargements took place. For example, in the 1980s, Greece became a part of the EEC. In 1986, Spain and Portugal became a part of the EEC. As a result of which, by the middle of the 1980s, there was a formation of a single European Act which set the goal of creating a fully integrated single market by the early 1990s. Now, as students of international economics, you must also look at such formations in the context of the Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, and the various other kinds of structural adjustment policies that were underway in many developing countries across the world, including India. And for us to be able to understand the ramifications of the EEC and its impact in terms of trade and bilateral agreements with other countries, we must keep in the background these developments that were taking place in the world economy as well, particularly in the form of conditional loan arrangements that India was getting into with with the Bretton Woods institutions, and the political economy of such structural adjustment programs and the interconnections that it had with international trade. Now, by the 1990s, the European Economic Community moved into a different phase. There was a transition from the EEC to the European Union. So a Maastricht Treaty was signed in 1992, and in the Maastricht Treaty, it was the EEC was officially transformed into the European Union. Thereby, it broadened its scope beyond economics to include foreign policy, security, and justice. Remember that so far, till the 1990s, the EEC or the European Economic Community was mostly an economic partnership between its member countries. But with the formation of the European Union, the scope of different kinds of transactions between the member countries moved beyond the domain of economics and started including foreign policy, security issues, and various other legal issues as well. And it is common sense to understand also that economic partnerships have interconnections with foreign policy, security, and other justice related matters as well. And therefore, the economic relations as part of the EEC and the member nation states also has some implications with regard to the larger formation of the European Union. Now, the European Union continued to expand, and it added many Central and Eastern European nations after the Cold War. And towards the end of the 1990s and the beginning of the 2000s, there was the introduction of the euro currency, which further deepened economic integration. So this is a summary view of how EEC evolved over a period of time and how it moved from a customs union like EEC to a single market and then to the European Union. Now, what were the significant contribution of EEC? Recall that economists agree that trade enhances efficiency by allowing specialization. You will also recall that Adam Smith observed division of labor or the degree of specialization which is limited by the market size. Now, international trade is of course an obvious way of increasing market size. Since the Second World War, countries started reducing barriers, trade barriers, mainly through multilateral negotiations such as the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade or the GATT. Now, a central premise of agreements such as GATT was that of non-discrimination, that is, countries should give all GATT members the same access to their markets. But the main exemption to these rules were the free trade areas. Now, the European Economic Community was actually a form of a free trade area or a free trade agreement. So what happens in the context of free trade agreements? Partners to free trade agreements are allowed to exempt one another's goods from import duties while maintaining tariffs or quotas on products from other GATT countries. And the EEC was a prominent example of a free trade area, or more specifically what economists call is a customs union. Now, what happens as a part of a customs union? Whereas member nations in a free trade area remove all barriers to trade among themselves, in a custom union, they also adopt uniform tariffs on goods and services from outside the union. So, to be able to understand that where UK stands in the context of European Economic Union, we need to understand different levels of economic integration. So far what we have studied is what is European Economic Community, what are the characteristics of the European Economic Community when we studied the evolution of European Economic Community, and we saw that European Economic Community is a form of a free trade area guided by the free trade agreement. And in the context of the EEC, we now need to see what is BREXIT. But to be able to understand what is BREXIT, we need to be able to differentiate between different levels of economic integration, and EEC is also a form of economic integration. Now, this table here shows the levels of integration, the key features of the different economic integration levels, followed by an example. So, what is a free trade agreement? A free trade agreement is an economic integration level. And the key features of free trade agreement is no tariffs or quotas on goods and services among members, but each country retains its own external trade policy. So, for example, you have NAFTA. Then you have customs union, which is basically the EEC. So that is FTA plus. So you have free trade agreement and you have a common external tariff on non-members, which is the pre-1993 EEC. Another level of economic integration is what is called the single market, which the EEC evolved into the European Union. This is FTA plus customs union plus free movement of goods, services, capital and labor among the member countries. And then finally you have another level of economic integration, which is economic and monetary union. That the key features of this is it is a single market plus there is a common currency. In the case of European Union it is euro, and they also have a shared monetary policy. And an example of the economic integration of economic and monetary union is what we know as the Eurozone, which is a part of the EU. But you must also understand here that UK, which was a part of the EEC and also the EU, never really adopted euro as a currency, but retained its own currency. So now let us see how different was UK in the context of the economic and monetary union, the United Kingdom, I mean. So the UK was a part of the EU single market and customs union before Brexit, which meant that there was free trade, common regulations and no border checks with EU members. But the UK was not part of the Eurozone as it retained its British pound. So why did the UK leave then? So Brexit basically means the exit of Britain or the exit of UK from the European Union. Now the question is, why did UK leave the European Union? Now there are a few key economic and political reasons behind it. A is sovereignty and trade policy. As part of the EU customs union, the UK could not sign its own independent trade agreements. So Brexit supporters wanted the UK to negotiate its own free trade agreements with countries like the United States, India and Australia. B, there was immigration and free movement of labor, or there needed to be immigration and free movement of labor. EU membership meant that there is free movement of people, allowing EU citizens to work in the UK without restrictions. But the Brexit supporters claimed that this led to job competition and pressure on public services of the UK. So therefore there was a call for leaving the EU and maintaining its own sovereignty. C, there was financial contributions to the EU budget. The UK was actually a net contributor to the EU budget. So Brexit supporters argued that leaving the EU would allow the UK to reallocate funds for its own domestic priorities. D was regulatory autonomy. The EU imposed common regulations on goods, labour and environmental policies. Some UK businesses and policymakers wanted to set their own trade and business laws. So now what was the impact of Brexit on trade and customs policies? There are of course various impacts of Brexit on international trade, but because this module is on customs union, let us just look at what was Brexit's impact on trade and customs policies. Now UK shift from a customs union to an FTA model meant the following. Before Brexit, the UK was part of the EU's customs union and a single market. And after Brexit, the UK negotiated a free trade agreement with the EU through the Trade and Cooperation Agreement of 2020. We can summarize the impact of Brexit on trade and customs policies in terms of a few aspects. So for example, in the aspect of tariffs and quotas, before Brexit, when UK had a EU membership, there was no tariffs or quotas. But after Brexit, UK had an FTA with EU or a free trade agreement with EU. There were no tariffs or quotas on goods, but new checks and paperwork came into place. Secondly, with respect to trade barriers, before Brexit, for UK, there were no border checks. There were same regulations for all the member states within the EU. But after Brexit, there were customs check and different regulatory standards. With regard to external trade policy, there was a common EU trade policy before Brexit. After Brexit, UK started signing its own free trade agreements. With respect to services and finance, before Brexit, there was free movement for businesses within the EU for UK as well. But after Brexit, there was limited access to the EU market. Now, let us move towards the conclusion of this lecture, where we focus on a few important points. For example, the future of UK, EU and India-UK trade relations. So what happens to UK-EU future trade relations? UK and EU are still major trading partners, but future divergence in regulations could create barriers. The UK may seek sectoral agreements with the EU, especially for finance and digital services. With respect to India-UK trade relations, the UK is negotiating an free trade agreement with India, aiming to boost trade and investments. Key areas include services, pharmaceuticals and manufacturing. And BREXIT also gives India new trade opportunities as the UK is no longer bound by EU trade policies. Now, we can look at BREXIT as a case study in economic integration. It is a key example of the challenges in leaving a customs union and single market. While the UK gained trade flexibility, but it also started facing very high costs and barriers in European Union trade. The case also highlights how political and economic interests shape trade policies, and it remains a critical lesson in international economics, particularly in the trade-offs between deep economic integration and national sovereignty. For this lecture, I have made references to the EconLib website. The learners are suggested that they can also visit this website, and a few other references have also been mentioned for your ease. Thank you.